Good afternoon. We are live. My name is David Scallon. I am the Secretary General of FACE, which is the European Federation for Hunting and Conservation. FACE is a co-secretariat of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting, Countryside, along with the European Landowners Organization. We are delighted to be helping to host this conference, and we have an excellent lineup of speakers, and we have a fabulous attendance. We have almost 500 people registered. Now, some quick announcements. As you see, we're using the Zoom platform, and on the bottom right, you have the option to select the language. And for those of you that want English, please click this bottom right button and select English. And the option for Spanish interpretation is also there as well. Now we have a 2-hour action-packed agenda, and we also have time for questions and answers in the last 30 minutes. And I should add that, of course, we have the option in some cases to allow an intervention, and we can open the camera and microphone. And I know we have at least one intervention, but I should add that members of the European Parliament are very welcome to make an intervention, and please flag this to us, and we can provide for this. I'm going to move towards the agenda. Now, the first announcement I need to make, unfortunately, Mr. Álvaro Amaro, who is president of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting, Countryside, had to attend an urgent appointment, but thankfully he has provided us with a video message. So we're very grateful of his ability to respond so quickly, and he sends his sincere apologies, but this was indeed a very urgent appointment he needed to attend this evening. And I should add that one update on the agenda in the closing remarks will be provided by MEP Juan Ignacio Zoido instead of Mr. Álvaro Amaro, who is a vice president of the Intergroup. Okay, without further ado, I am going to move to show the opening remarks by video from Mr. Álvaro Amaro, who is president of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting, Countryside.
First of all, I hope that you are all safe and in a good health. On a lighter note, I would like to welcome you in another Intergroup online conference. Special thanks are due to today's speakers and our co-hosters, the Vice President Elsi Katainen and Juan Ignacio Zoido, that will close this event in my behalf. And special thanks also to our coordinator Herbert Dorfman, and to our special also to our Intergroup co-secretariat for their fundamental support. Due to an unexpected commitment, unfortunately, I can't be with you today. I write some notes that I read to you. Is my thinking about this problem that is very different in the European countries. Nevertheless, the technology allows me to share with you some of my thoughts, is the topics that I write about this key topic for rural communities. We must admit that the return of large carnivores in different European rural areas are created additional challenge for communities and for activities. But activities such as agriculture, livestock, nature, conservation, tourism, creating a new set of issues as certain large carnivores start getting closer and closer to human settlements, sometimes posing a threat to their safety. This is not, as I said, a uniform reality for the whole Europe. However, that is not why it is less urgent. For instance, in Portugal, my country, the wolf remains a distant problem, although sightings and contacts have increased in recent years in the north. In other European countries, as we know, and we'll hear about today, the reality is not quite the same. Which brings me back to the issue. We need to better involve affected farmers, landowners, hunters, and foresters on the ground in the decision-making process. The EU must provide a clear legal framework which effectively guarantees a certain degree of flexibility to deal with the challenge large carnivores pose at the regional and local level in line with the latest scientific developments. The issue of coexistence must therefore be addressed taking into account not only ecological but also economic and social factors. We definitely need an integrated approach. The key to the success for this relationship is in everything a holistic, rational, and balanced solution. Before giving the floor to the knowledgeably, I wish you, honorable guests, a fruitful, constructive, and positive debate. Thank you.
We thank Mr. Álvaro Amaro, President of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting Countryside, for providing that recorded message. And again, he sends his sincere apologies that he could not make it due to an unforeseen urgent appointment. Excellent. Let's move to the opening speeches. And the first is from MEP Juan Ignacio Zoido, who is Vice President of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting Countryside. So the floor is yours, Mr. Zoido.
Muchas gracias. Buenas tardes a todos y muy especialmente saludar a nuestro presidente, a Álvaro Amaro, y también, como no, a Elsi Katainen, que hará después uso de la palabra, al resto de colegas que estén conectados, pero sobre todo a todos aquellos interesados que forman parte de este gran grupo de FACE, a los que les deseo que pueda ser de utilidad las reflexiones que hoy hagamos. Bienvenidos a esta nueva sesión del Intergrupo y sobre todo esta sesión monográfica sobre grandes carnívoros. Como decía el presidente Álvaro Amaro, la reciente publicación del informe sobre el estado de la naturaleza por parte de la Comisión Europea nos brinda una oportunidad de excepción para hablar del futuro de la relación entre sociedad y naturaleza en Europa. En particular, hoy vamos a hablar de los problemas sociales y económicos que ha supuesto la conservación de determinados grandes carnívoros en numerosos países de la Unión Europea. Las estrictas medidas de protección de la legislación europea han generado un crecimiento de las poblaciones de estos grandes carnívoros, como es el caso del lobo. De forma natural, estas especies han ido desbordando las zonas que habitaban, provocando problemas para la coexistencia con las actividades humanas. En primer lugar, Los ganaderos están viendo con impotencia cómo los lobos diezman progresivamente sus ganaderías. En segundo lugar, están generando problemas de inseguridad para las poblaciones rurales, lo que a su vez está llevando al abandono de las tierras y a la despoblación, una verdadera crisis en países como en España. Y en tercer lugar, están dando lugar a una emergencia de enfermedades zoonóticas, un riesgo que tras la pandemia actual no podemos permitirnos soslayar. En particular, me gustaría compartir con todos ustedes el caso de España. Creo que la evolución de los últimos años en mi país demuestra cómo el marco jurídico europeo ya no responde de una manera efectiva a los cambios que se están produciendo en el terreno de los Estados miembros. Por un lado, la población de lobos ubicadas al norte del río Duero está incluido en el anexo 5 de la Directiva de Hábitat y, por tanto, está sujeta a medidas de gestión. En la práctica, esto significa que algunas regiones sí permiten la caza regulada de lobos, como es el caso de Cantabria, y otras regiones, como Asturias, no lo consideran políticamente correcto y su gestión queda en manos de la administración. ¿Esto qué significa? Pues significa que son los funcionarios públicos los encargados de decidir sobre la caza del lobo. A pesar de ello, la población de lobos en la región muestra un incremento constante, lo que está desencadenando importantes conflictos en las comunidades rurales. Por otro lado, la población de lobos en el sur del río Duero está incluida en la lista de especies bajo el régimen de protección especial y listada en el anexo 4 de esa Directiva de Hábitat. Esto está causando un crecimiento descontrolado de su población, lo que plantea serios desafíos a muchos ganaderos y agricultores. En el caso de la región de Castilla y León, la más afectada, los ataques a la ganadería han aumentado de manera exponencial. De cerca de unos 400 en 2007, pasaron a 900 en 2013 y han alcanzado 1.600 en 2017. La magnitud del problema es evidente, con unos pagos compensatorios a los ganaderos por las pérdidas experimentadas de 800.000 euros en el año 2017. Resulta evidente, por tanto, que el río Duero ya no es la línea divisoria adecuada para separar la población de lobos españoles entre el anexo 5 y el anexo 4. Es necesario modificar estos anexos a la luz del progreso científico y técnico, tal como se establece claramente en el artículo 19 de la Directiva sobre Hábitat. Y yo me pregunto, ¿por qué esto no se está contemplando a pesar de las solicitudes en este sentido provenientes de diferentes Estados miembros? En el año 2012 hubo una demanda específica presentada por España por el gobierno del Partido Popular para trasladar la población de lobos de Castilla y León al sur del río Duero del anexo 4 al anexo 5. Pretendíamos con ello gestionar este incremento descontrolado de la misma manera en toda la región, pero la Comisión nos lo denegó. Con los años, creo que esta medida resulta todavía más necesaria. Necesitamos la creación de una nueva línea divisoria por debajo de la Comunidad de Madrid, similar al ejemplo de Grecia, donde se utiliza el paralelo 39 para dividir la población de lobo en diferentes anexos. Mientras esto no ocurra, seguimos esperando por parte de la Comisión unas directrices interpretativas sobre la Directiva de Hábitat con el objetivo de facilitar a las administraciones competentes la adopción de medidas de control de las poblaciones de determinados depredadores y facilitar así la coexistencia con las actividades ganaderas. Estas directrices deberían señalarse, en estas directrices debería señalarse el camino que deben seguir las administraciones para garantizar la convivencia entre los grandes carnívoros y las actividades humanas, en particular la ganadería. También debería contener ejemplos de medidas tomadas en varios Estados miembros de la Unión Europea e incluir el grave problema biológico que presenta la hibridación de los lobos con los perros. En conclusión, creo que tenemos la obligación de garantizar un marco jurídico europeo flexible y, sobre todo, claro, que genere certidumbre legal para las administraciones, los cazadores y los ganaderos. Con la nueva estrategia de la granja a la mesa, les estamos diciendo a nuestros ganaderos que tenemos que dirigirnos a producciones más sostenibles y de mayor calidad. La ganadería tradicional extensiva es una solución óptima en términos de protección ambiental, producción biológica, calidad y bienestar animal, pero al mismo tiempo es la más vulnerable a los grandes carnívoros. En algunos lugares el perjuicio es enorme para las denominaciones de origen, si no se pone coto al problema. Y hay que recordar que las denominaciones de origen de productos agroalimentarios son la mejor industria que puede sobrevivir en las zonas rurales y contribuir a frenar la despoblación. Igualmente, debemos tener en cuenta que es en los países en los que el estado del medio ambiente es mejor, porque se disponen de amplias zonas con baja densidad de población o con una gran cantidad de zonas protegidas incluidas en la Red Natura 2000, es donde hay problemas de convivencia entre la ganadería, la caza y los grandes carnívoros. En cambio, estos problemas no existen en los países más ricos y centrales de la Unión Europea. En estos países, la sobrepoblación y el desarrollo económico han expulsado prácticamente a las especies animales más valiosas. Esperamos, por tanto, que la Dirección General de Medio Ambiente reflexione de manera integral sobre las estrategias de biodiversidad y de la granja a la mesa y apoye a aquellos Estados miembros que más aportan a la Unión Europea en términos de protección de medio ambiente, naturaleza y biodiversidad. Apoyarlos es contribuir a resolver los conflictos que plantean la despoblación, el éxodo rural y la creciente protección de la naturaleza. Muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation, Mr. Juan Ignacio Zoido, Vice President of the Intergroup. Next up in the opening speeches, we have a member of the European Parliament, Elsi Katainen, who was also Vice President of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting Countryside. So the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. And also on my behalf, warm welcome to this event. We are here today to discuss large carnivores and the future steps with conservation and management. The recently published State of Nature 2020 report indicates positive population trends for Europe's large carnivores and especially for the wolf. However, with increase in numbers, more challenges and problems with coexistence arise. These challenges are diverse in nature depending on socio-economic situation, climate, farming methods, and other factors, which means we need regional and local solutions. Hence, a certain degree of flexibility to execute management decision is needed. I want to give one example from my home country, Finland. During this hunting season, which started in August, already 25 hunting dogs have been killed by wolves, and many dogs have been injured. The numbers have been growing for years. Hunting dogs not only hold immense emotional value to the owners, but they are also an integral part of the Finnish hunting culture and essential for regulation moose population, or which in turn affects traffic safety and forest damage in our country. In order to have effective and sustainable management of large carnivores, we need a wide toolbox. I want to use this opportunity to mention that the citizens' initiative to allow triple wolf hunting and prevent wolf injuries was debated today in the Finnish parliament. Over 50,000 Finns signed the initiative. I think this shows just how important and meaningful the topic is for everyday people. It is important to find workable solutions to mitigate the conflicts between human activities and large carnivores in line with the EU law. Many stakeholders are awaiting the Commission's revised guidance on strict protection to better understand how conservation and management priorities can be correctly applied to achieve long-lasting coexistence with large carnivores in Europe's multifunctional landscape. In Finland, we need more clarity on the legal basis for hunting of large carnivores once favorable conservation status is reached. 8 out of the 9 wolf populations in Europe are served by one or more countries. Finland, Sweden, and Norway are developing a transboundary approach to managing the Finnish-Scandia wolf population. The Finnish population is also part of the Corellian subpopulation, which is shared with Russian Corellia. This in mind, I hope and I believe that the European Commission should communicate better on transboundary management plans and promote joint conversation status assessments. By these opening words, I want to wish you all the most welcome to this webinar. Let's have a fruitful discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elsi Katainen. And next, we are going to have introductory remarks from Member of the European Parliament, Herbert Dorfman, who is also a member of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting, Countryside. So over to you, Mr. Dorfman. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and thanks to the Intergroup for this initiative, which I think is really important and timeful. Well, I can also only say some additional words to what my two colleagues already said. They already told us a lot of important points. I would like to say we have an ongoing European legislation. It's the two directives, Natura 2000 directive, and if it comes up to the wolf, it's the Flora Fauna Habitat directive. And this directive has been decided in 1992 in a period when the situation of the wolf and other species, because I think the problem generally is also, we have also for other species, large carnivores and others, the situation was completely different. The wolf in 1992 in the European Union of 1992, which was a completely different European Union as the European Union we have today. In this time, the wolf was practically extincted in the European Union. For example, in my own member state in Italy, we had just few animals in 1992. And a lot of regions where the wolf always has been were not part of the European Union at that time. But time changed and legislation didn't change. And I think this is the main problem, that we have in front of a legislation which is somehow also flexible. It allows to intervene. And I think at the latest, since the court, the ruling of the European Court of Justice on the Finn case, it is quite clear what is the flexibility of the directive as it stands today. But we even do not use this flexibility, which is, let's say, in the directive, would be in the directive today. Today, we are in a completely different situation in the European Union. We have more than 20,000 wolves. Let me give just an example from my member states and from my region. In Italy, now we have between 2,000 and 3,000 wolves. Nobody knows exactly. It seems that more or less 1/3 to 25% to 1/3 of these wolves are hybrids with dogs. As Ignacio Zoido said before, this is a big problem, especially in some regions in the European Union. It's a problem not only for cohabitation, to live together with the wolf. It's a problem for the species itself, because more and more this hybridization clearly endangers the species itself. So we are far away in Italy from having or to have the wolf and other large carnivores close to extinction. In my region, this is maybe a very interesting example at the European level what can happen. The wolf returned like 5-6 years ago, and it becomes more and more every year. We have in my neighborhood here, really very close to the place I live, we have a race of sheep which was close to extinction, and we invested quite a lot of European money in the rural development plan, so in the second pillar of the common agricultural policy, to improve the situation of this species and to bring it away from this danger of extinction. And now, and we're quite successful. We started the program like 15-20 years ago. And since the wolf is here, the population of this sheep, which has been, let's say, supported with European money, now goes down, and we are more or less already after 5 years at the original figures where we have been 15 years ago or 20 years ago. And this shows that we need a balance between nature, biodiversity on one side, and agricultural activity on the other side. Because I think biodiversity is not only in nature. Biodiversity is also in agricultural activity. And I think, and this is a deep political opinion of myself, I think we need a balance between nature and people and human beings. And this also in the countryside. And very often urban people see the countryside only from the nature side, especially regions like my own, which is a highly touristic region. They see it only as the natural, let's say, side of the region, but they do not understand that people need to live in this region. There are farmers who need to live. There is industry. There is small and medium-sized enterprise, and they all need to go on if the region wants to go on. So we need this balance between the two. That is, and I want to come to my conclusion. I think we need 2 or 3 things. First of all, we should go on at the European level to work for more flexibility. And this is not to bring the wolf again close, or the bear or close to extinction. This is clear. The wolf and the bears today, they are again in our natural environment, and they have the right to be there. But this needs to be in a balance. And I think it's time, after 25 years, 28 years after the directive, it's time to act. It's time to adapt the flexibility of in the management of these animals to the reality. And this doesn't mean that we need to change the directive, which I think would be difficult. We should also reflect if the Annex 4, which is or where most of the wolf in most of the regions in Europe is in the Annex 4 of the directive, if the Annex 4 is still the right place for the wolf. Or if the wolf now came because the directive was successful, and this is a success of European legislation, that after 28 years, the directive was so successful that we can put this species from 4 to 5, because it's not, the wolf doesn't need anymore the protection of the Annex 4 of the directive. But creating this, and this I want to underline, creating this flexibility, which I think should be our job in Brussels, we need also member states which act. Because I see a lot of member states in Europe which go on saying that the European Union needs to be something, but they do not use the flexibility which is in the directive already today. Or the other way around, we have very few member states. One of them maybe is Finland, one of them might be France, one of them, if it comes to bears, might be Slovenia, but we have very few member states which use today the flexibility they have. My member state does not use this flexibility at all, because there is zero attempt to do anything, even with 3,000 wolves on the ground. So, and if in this situation, even with a much more higher flexibility at European level, if the member states do not act afterwards, this doesn't make sense. And we need the responsibility at the regional level. And I think on this, the guidelines, already mentioned guidelines by Elsi Katainen, could be very helpful. I think we need to improve management systems at the regional level. Something is possible, not everything is possible, especially in mountain region as my own is extremely difficult. In highly touristic regions, very often difficult, but something can be done. And I think in this combination of regions, member states, and the more flexible legislation at the European level, I think we can address this problem. Thank you very much, and once again, thanks for the initiative.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dorfman, for your introductory remarks. I should add to the attendees, for which we have many. If you have questions for the speakers, you can post them in the Q&A box. Our next speaker, it's the keynote speech, and it is Nikola Notaro, who is head of the Nature Protection Unit within DG Environment in the European Commission. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, David, and good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank all the members of the Intergroup for the invitation to address you this afternoon, and especially FACE for organizing the event. Yes, we, of course, have to see the protection of large carnivores in the framework of the biodiversity strategy that the Commission has adopted under the Green Deal last May, which is a response to a dire situation of biodiversity in Europe and globally. Because as we know, the loss of biodiversity is continuing, and this is in itself caused by impact of human activity. It's exacerbating climate change, and it is also exacerbated by climate change. So it's one of the defining challenges that we really have to address in our societies today. And of course, we need a real stepping up of efforts in order to address the causes of the biodiversity loss. And the large carnivores that we are discussing this afternoon are, of course, a very important, even iconic part of that biodiversity that we are trying to protect and restore. And yes, several of the previous speakers have referred to the State of Nature report that the Commission has published a couple of weeks ago. And the State of Nature really shows how there's been, since the last report 6 years ago, rather limited progress in terms of improving the status of biodiversity. Specifically on large carnivores, the picture is very much mixed. We can certainly say today that the wolf, for instance, is on a path to recovery, so the situation has improved. At the same time, it is also true that it has only reached favorable conservation status in few member states, mainly in Eastern Europe, and so it's quite limited, this recovery at the moment. The situation is also very mixed for the other large carnivores. The discussion so far has focused mostly on the wolf, but of course the bear, the lynx, the wolverine are equally deserving of attention, protection, and restoration efforts. It's very clear that where these large carnivores come back to areas in which they've been absent for a long time because they had been previously persecuted and exterminated for decades and sometimes for centuries, the situation can get very complicated. And in fact, it's exactly in these areas where we have the strongest conflicts. And in particular, with some of the farming activities, with some of the livestock rearing activities. Now, rural communities face, of course, huge challenges nowadays and for some time due to socioeconomic causes that are much broader than the return of large carnivores. The socioeconomic impact of large carnivores is limited, but of course at local level or on individual farms in areas where the habits, the traditional knowledge related to coexistence with large carnivores has disappeared, then the impact can be significant and important. We have realized this in the Commission for some time. And in fact, we have put in place quite a number of tools that are available to us in order to help rural communities, especially through funding, through dialogue, and through guidance. I would like to recall that under European funds, and in particular under the Rural Development Fund, it is possible to support farmers for prevention measures, from fences to shepherding dogs, to pay farmers for the time that they spend in additional work due to the maintenance of such fences and dogs. It's possible even to pay for the food for the dogs, for the training. Actually, all preventive measures can be supported through the Rural Development Fund. We have at the same time also made more flexible and more clear the guidance on state aid at European level, so that member states are now allowed very clearly to support both prevention and compensation measures up to 100%, without this being considered illegal state aid. So it is possible, and the Commission has amended in 2018 the state aid guidelines to that end. So both prevention measures and compensation measures can actually be paid 100%. And this is very important because, of course, if we want to ensure coexistence and acceptance of large carnivores, we need to support those to actually suffer from the consequences of the return of these large carnivores. Apart from financial support, of course, there is a big role for dialogue, awareness, and education. And the Commission has developed a EU large carnivore platform at European level that is co-chaired by the Commission and DLO, the European Landowners Organization. And we agree very much with the remarks made by MEP Álvaro before, who underlined the need to involve landowners in this debate fully. And in this respect, we have created a forum where actually best practices can be exchanged and the perspective of different stakeholders can be represented and mutually understood. But we've also focused on areas where the debate, where the dialogue is more difficult, and tried to support, with the help of the European Parliament actually, dialogue at regional level. So the European Parliament has financed, through pilot projects that the Commission is implementing, several regional platforms which are taking place across the EU. We have platforms dedicated to the wolf in Castilla and León in Spain. We have them in France. We have them in Finland. We have one devoted to the bear in Romania. We've had it in Italy in the Apennines. And we also finance quite a large range of, life projects which have demonstrated the effectiveness of prevention measures in order to avoid damage to livestock, for instance, induced by large carnivores. It's quite clear that coexistence needs mutual adaptation. If we don't accept the idea that some farming practices need to evolve and to adjust to a new reality which includes the wolf, then it's very difficult to reach a peaceful coexistence. For that, the support to preventive measures such as fencing, shepherding, livestock guarding dogs, deterrent devices is absolutely essential. We have positive experience all over Europe. I can quote, for instance, from my own country, Piemonte, in the Western Alps, where 20 years there was a huge conflict related to the return of the wolf, and this conflict has basically disappeared in that region nowadays. There are many things that can be done in order to ensure a peaceful coexistence. And we need to rebuild the knowledge about traditional, locally adapted livestock protection practices that has disappeared in previous decades. Before addressing in the second part of my intervention the actual questions that FACE has distributed together with the agenda of this meeting, I wanted to also reply to a couple of questions directed to the Commission by the MEPs that have previously spoken. I would, for instance, like to mention the issue of the annexes, Annex 4 versus Annex 5, protection versus strict protection. Of course, it is possible to change the directives. It's a complicated process, but it is possible. And the legal understanding that we have is that a co-decision procedure would be necessary to change the annexes. But there must be a fundamental premise fulfilled before such a change takes place, and this is that actually favorable conservation status for the particular wolf population that we refer to has been achieved. And at least for the areas where we're talking about most often in terms of conflicts, this is not the case. And this is based on the reports that member states provide to us in relation to favorable conservation status. It's not an assessment which is done by the Commission, it's done by the member states themselves. And in fact, it should also be kept in mind that even when a species is in Annex 5, and they are in Annex 5 for a number of member states, it is always essential to make sure that the species maintains such favorable conservation status when they are in Annex 5. So the issue of changing annexes will not remove the need to ensure the protection of the species and its maintenance at favorable conservation status. So we should really have this clear in mind, because this otherwise gives a wrong impression in the debate. The Annex 5 is not a license to kill wolves, bears, wolverine, or lynx. There are conditions attached to that as well. There were a couple of mentioning of the guidelines from the Commission. Of course, the guidelines are on the species protection, so not just large carnivores. They concern more than 1,000 species, from dolphins to beavers to large carnivores indeed. And we are in the process of finalizing these guidelines. Of course, we will, it's an update of existing guidance. So the Commission has already provided guidance over the years, but there's been evolution related, for instance, to the case law of the European Court of Justice. So we are updating the document in question. One thing that the Commission cannot do is, of course, changing the law through guidance. So it should be clear that we are bound by the text of the directive and by the interpretation that the EU Court of Justice has given. So this should also be quite clear. Otherwise, doing more than that would be beyond the powers of the Commission. There was a question about the promotion of shared assessments for transboundary population. I think MEP Katainen raised this issue, and I think it's a very important question because it is possible under the Habitats Directive to indeed, for member states, monitor and report jointly transboundary populations of species such as large carnivores. And the Commission has encouraged this possibility. I've personally held 24 dialogues with member states in the last couple of years. And for all member states where large carnivores populations are shared, we have actually encouraged them to make use of this opportunity. But this has not materialized. Member states have not used this opportunity yet. We hope that they will do it in the future. And finally, let me underline that there is a difference between a species not being a danger of extinction and a species being in favorable conservation status. And so certainly the wolf in Europe nowadays is no longer at risk of extinction, at least for most of the population. There is one population of the wolf, the Sierra Morena in Spain, which actually has gone extinct. It was a very small one. But otherwise, the risk of extinction is quite low all over Europe. However, the conditions to reach favorable conservation status are different. It's like for humans, it's not because I'm not at risk of dying tomorrow that I'm actually doing very well necessarily. And if you like, it's a bit the same for the wolf. It's on a path to recover. Before I go to the questions quickly, to the questions from Faith, I should also recall that actually the annexes of the directive have been amended quite a few times in the past. included in relation to large carnivores, this has happened on the occasion of each accession. So when member states have joined the EU, there's been a debate about where their species would be classified. And so on that occasion, the annexes have been amended. Quickly through the questions before I come to a closure. The first one is, it's an intriguing one. It was suggesting that there could be a sort of prioritization between different large carnivores and which ones should be more protected than others nowadays. In terms of conservation of our biodiversity, of course, that's not an approach that we would like to take. We certainly think that all large carnivores need to be protected, and there is a principle of non-deterioration that should be applied. The wolf, the wolverine, the bear, the lynx, they certainly need protection and need conservation measures across the European Union. However, maybe it's useful to recall that the Commission already in 2015 developed, together with the Large Carnivore Initiative for Europe, a document on priority action for conservation for each of the large carnivores population. And it is this in this document we have really highlighted, on the basis of scientific advice, priority actions for large carnivores population in different parts of the continent. So this would be the approach that we still maintain is quite valid. Now, another question concerned the scale at which the assessment of favorable status is made. Of course, the directive is a legal document, so member states are only responsible for what happens in their jurisdiction or for the activities that they control. And that's why the directive takes an approach which is based on assessing status in the biogeographic regions of the member states. However, as I said, the Commission fully recognized the possibility for transboundary populations to have joint assessment with across member states. And this is, as I said, something that has not been exploited yet at the moment. There was also a question which is maybe a more legal question related to derogations. So the possibility of, for instance, killing a specimen of a strictly protected large carnivore if the status is not yet favorable. And we have a clear answer by the EU Court of Justice since 2007 to this question. And this answer has been repeated in a judgment from last year. So yes, it is possible to use the derogation even if a species is not in favorable status. But of course, we need to be extra careful because derogations already are derogation from the rule, so one has to be careful. But if the species is in bad status, then we need to be extra careful to ensure that derogation would be neutral. It would not have a negative impact pushing the species even further away from favorable status. And then the last question I'd like to address briefly, because the colleagues who will follow me are much more competent than me to address this, is the issue of problem bears or bold wolves. And yes, the issue of problem bears in particular has been studied quite a bit. And we actually have developed some years ago a guidance document on defining, preventing, reacting to problem bear behavior. And this gives, I think, an extremely useful guidance to the national and regional authorities on how to deal with this type of situation. Most often, what causes the problem with the bears is especially access to anthropogenic food sources. And when this is removed, this can actually reduce considerably the human-bear conflict. as regards wolves, I think the experience is much more limited with regard to bald wolves, but there have been, I think, useful best practices, I would say, that have been developed, for instance, by the German Center for Documentation and Consultation on Wolves, which has produced a sort of guidance document on how to deal with both wolves, particularly wolves which have been in contact with humans and they've been habituated, or they've been conditioned by the provision of food by humans. And I think this guidance could be extremely useful to authorities in deciding what to do when, depending on the situation that they are facing. And again, the Large Carnivore Initiative for Europe has also provided a policy support document that we believe goes in the same direction of this German guidance I have just cited. So it would be extremely useful. Yes, I think I will leave it at that. I hope that I give you an overview of the expected evolutions on the side of the Commission in the coming weeks and months, and I'll be happy to contribute to the debate a bit later.
Thank you very much, Nikola Notaro. That was very comprehensive, and we really appreciate that. You know, of course, as a keynote speech, I can say that I think all of our participants would have, you know, find that very interesting. So thank you very much. And yes, questions are coming in the Q&A. Next up, we have a panel discussion. And I would encourage our experts to try to stick to the time. So you have 10 minutes each. And the first speaker is Dr. John Linnell from the Norwegian Institute for Nature Research. So over to you, John. The floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Hope the speakers are working here. I almost feel that my speech actually is unnecessary because virtually everything I'm going to say has actually already been said by multiple people. So I think this is actually going to become quite kind of a repetition of many of the insights and words of wisdom that we have already had. But I'll give you a quick kind of rundown through some of my thoughts as to where we are in the status of large carnivore and conservation. Just a week ago, I was actually in a meeting that was talking about this issue of transformative change and the green transition, and thinking about how we have to change everything as we move forward. But then looking back, I also realized how much transformation has happened in the last 20 to 30 years. Kind of 30 years ago, most of the large carnivores were highly endangered species in Europe. And now suddenly we're dealing with discussions about how to coexist with them. And this, I think, shows how much transition and change has happened on a continental scale, especially for these big species. I guess for a lot of other bits of biodiversity, the situation is much worse. But certainly carnivores have been leading the way by showing what is possible, but also identifying where the challenges come. So I'm just going to have a quick little PowerPoint here, which hopefully will show some issues here. So hopefully the PowerPoint is now working, I hope. So a theme which has turned up again and again today has been this issue of how do we manage diversity in a coordinated manner. And this has to be one of the great kind of challenges of our modern times. And it's not limited to large carnivores. This is a mainstream political challenge. What I'm going to do first is give a very short overview of our expert assessment of the state of large carnivores. And this assessment is slightly different because it has been conducted by an independent group of experts. And we have used not the favorable conservation status assessment protocols, but the IUCN red listing criteria as sort of an objective and very biological way to assess the status of populations. The other thing is we have done this on the level of the biological populations, not on the level of member states. So it's a slightly alternative approach, but I think our conclusions are slightly, well, are broadly similar. The key thing here is just to identify which kind of populations have a different threat status. So the critically endangered, endangered and vulnerable are what we view as being threatened, whereas the NT and the LC statuses are not so threatened. So if we look at wolves, wolves certainly have regained an enormous distribution across Europe. And many of these kind of populations are large and healthy and doing well. And on a population level, many of them do not have any threatened status, but some do. So the ones which appear to be vulnerable, at least, are the ones in the Alps, those in the lowlands, Central Europe, and those in Scandinavia. Now, since this was a 2016 assessment, the situation in Central Europe has changed dramatically as the German population is expanding. So this assessment may well be slightly out of date for them, but certainly for Scandinavia and the Alps, these wolves are not sort of critically endangered or endangered, but there's still a need for certain caution. In Scandinavia, the issue is linked to inbreeding rather than population size. But for all of these kind of populations, the trend is moving forward. So wolves certainly are not sort of the species where we really have these issues of saving them from extinction. If we're moving on to bears, we see that we have a lot of bears in Europe, but with a very uneven distribution and very uneven threat status. So while some kind of populations are large and doing well, we do have some which are deserving of conservation attention. And this is mainly the ones in the south. So we have 3 populations which are viewed as being critically endangered. That's in the Pyrenees, the Alps, and the Apennines. The population in Cantabria is still endangered, even though it seems to be expanding and doing well. And the ones in southeastern Europe are viewed as being vulnerable. They're not in any immediate threat of extinction, but just a place where a certain degree of caution is needed. Before decarpations, the Baltic, Scandinavia, Corellia, bears seem to be doing well and are not viewed as being threatened on a population basis. Lynx have an even more fragmented distribution in Europe. And here we have quite a few populations which are of conservation concern. The Balkan population in Macedonia and Albania, and some of the ones in Germany, in the Harz Mountains and south, are critically endangered. And lynx in the Alps, the Jura Mountains, and the northern part of the Dinaric-Pindos range are also viewed as being endangered. So lynx certainly are the species where the most conservation concern is needed. All of these kind of populations in Central Europe, which are endangered or critically endangered, with the exception of that one in Macedonia and Albania, are reintroduced. And many of these kind of reintroductions started back in the 70s. And it just gives you a demonstration that for some species, it can take a very long time to bring about kind of recovery. And even maybe after 20 or 30 years, when you think things are doing well, things suddenly stagnate. And there's a need for further conservation interventions to nurture them coming forward. The situation in Scandinavia is not particularly acute. Like we have maybe 2,000 lynx up there. So it's just that the trend in recent years in some parts of Sweden has been kind of declining, which has flagged it as being kind of vulnerable. But again, it's not some type of kind of conservation crisis. And populations in the Carpathians, in the Baltics, and kind of Corellia also viewed as being safe and out of any threat of extinction. So the main message emerging from this is that things are generally doing well, looking at the big picture. But when you zoom into some of the local situations and local populations, there are certainly places where there is a need for an awful lot of conservation concern, especially for bears and lynx in southern and central Europe. Moving on to kind of interpretations, right? We have these very different situations. We have some huge populations of many thousands of animals, and other ones which have only 10, 20, 30. So obviously you need very different kind of management kind of regimes under these different contexts. But despite that, we still need to ensure that we have this cross-border coordination, because really the long-term viability of carnivores in Europe, even at the big populations, will still depend on a high degree of connectivity on a continental scale. So even though we talk about kind of populations, we're still looking at the even bigger picture the whole time at the continental level scale. This is where carnivore conservation has to happen. And it's why the carnivores are the most challenging group of species to conserve, because they just need so much space. Moving on to the challenges, because underlining the kind of conservation kind of success is only half of the story. We obviously know that we have an awful lot of issues here. The carnivores have certainly shown that they can live with us, that they can share our landscape, even though Europe is far from any wilderness. Bears, wolves, lynx really have shown a remarkable adaptation to us. The challenge comes in our adaptation to them, right? And here we have a problem, well, it's like a challenge, because we're going to a place where we've never really been before in history. And that is trying to build this sustainable relationship with large carnivores in shared landscapes. In the past, kind of conservation kind of happened. It was never part of anyone's goal, and often extermination was the historical goal. So now we're moving to a place where we really haven't been, trying to build up this sustainable relationship with big furry animals. I believe, and I think our experience kind of shows us, that the coexistence between humans and carnivores can be achieved. It's challenging, it requires an awful lot of technical innovation and adaptation, but it can be done. What is proving to be harder is the coexistence between different human perspectives in shared landscapes. Just to underline that, we have this kind of diversity of cultures and kind of traditions in Europe, right? And heading from north to south, east to west, we have different perspectives from rural and urban. We have, all sorts of different interests, from hunting and farming to tourism and conservation. But what I think is becoming more and more the flashpoint and the challenging issue in carnivore conservation is that we have this diversity of values among our populations. And this is not so much on the big scale of North and South Europe. This is actually within our own populations, within our own countries, within our own regions, that people are having increasingly diverse values. And the thing that really brings this value difference to a head is the issue of killing carnivores. Is it appropriate or not to kill a carnivore in certain contexts? Can we kill a problem individual? Can we hunt them? These are all the really big questions that seem to be dividing our publics into rather extreme and confrontational camps. So the question is, how do we include all this diversity, both the underlying kind of geographic diversity and interest diversity, and this increasing value diversity into one legal framework? This is not easy. And I really would not like to be sitting in the European Commission trying to balance all this. It's much easier being an independent expert on the outside. The challenge again comes across here of scale, right? And the question is, where is the problem? And I think what we've heard today from an awful lot of the speakers is that the problems may not always be at the European level. We've heard multiple speakers say that the countries are not using the flexibility that they have. So on one hand, countries are asking for a greater degree of flexibility on the European level, but equally well, it's pointed out that they have flexibility which they aren't even using. And this, I think, underlines the fact that the tensions today may not always be between member states and Brussels, but they may actually be within the member states themselves, within their own publics, who may have totally different points of view on the level of a region or a country on how large carnivores should actually be managed and what the conservation priorities are and how we deal with the trade-offs between human interest, economic interest, and conservation interest. So while I totally understand there are many challenges concerned with the European level legislation, I think a far greater and emerging threat or challenge is lying with the diversity of opinion at the local and national level about values, especially about where it is appropriate to kill carnivores. And this is really the emerging challenge of the 21st century, is dealing with this issue. How do we fix this? Well, the solutions are both technical and political, right? But we also have to see that politics, as well as being an essential part of the solution, is also in some contexts emerging also as a part of the problem. We see a widespread sort of popularization, it's like kind of a populistic movement where expertise is being undermined, where sets of alternative facts are emerging. We see many cases where conflict is being instrumentalized to further the goals of special interest groups or even certain individual egos. And when we have a focus on the wrong issue, everyone loses. Blaming a wolf for a wider social economic conflict means that, first of all, a wolf is going to lose, and also the people who are influenced by these wider changes don't address the real underlying causes of their problems. So with that, I'd like to wrap up and just sort of underline that sort of our challenges for the future are lying certainly with the social conflicts, and especially, I think, balancing the different interests that different people have and their different values and their different view of what is an appropriate degree of coexistence. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, John Linnell. Always good to have that European scale scientific approach and lots of food for thought as well. The next speaker in our panel session is Moritz Klose from Program Lead on Wildlife in Germany and Europe for WWF. And I would say thank you, John, for keeping that within 10 minutes. And I would also encourage our remaining speakers to try your best to keep within 10 minutes. So the floor is yours, Moritz. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you to the Intergroup for inviting me as a speaker. Thank you for the previous speakers to offer your views and your messages and your thoughts on the future of conservation and management of large carnivores. It's always hard to be John and speak after him, but I will try my very best and offer you some views and some messages of WWF and how we see how coexisting with large carnivores in Europe can be achieved and possible. WWF coordinates the Live Euro Large Carnivores project with 16 partners and countries across Europe, where we work in 5 different focus regions on improving coexistence with large carnivores through communication, through cross-border cooperation, and through knowledge exchange. The partners believe that coexistence is possible. As we heard before, it's hard, but we believe there are ways, it is possible. We believe that despite the conflicts, approaches exist throughout Europe where people have found ways to live in the presence of large carnivores. Obviously, there is no one-fits-all approach because the local conditions differ, but we have seen that there are good tools and that we need to work closer together to learn from one another what works and maybe what doesn't work. You have seen the map from IUCN, from John, on the species status, and the Article 17 reporting offers a similar but slightly different view. When we talk about large carnivore management and conservation, we also need to have we always have to need a close look at the species concerned and at the population concerned. Wolves, as we heard, seem to be doing quite well across the range, but threats like isolation, like poaching, still remain. And with lynx, as you see here and in the map before, basically all lynx populations in Western Europe still need concrete conservation actions. So for all these species and for all the challenges, I think the key is that we really work on a transboundary level and really work closer on population-based conservation actions. For all these species, it's crucial to have a robust monitoring system, based on science. And monitoring is always a good way to engage stakeholders, to include stakeholders, to get into dialogue with stakeholders on a continuous basis. There is a need for harmonization of the monitoring. We already heard it needs to be population-based, it needs to be transboundary. And there are many good examples from projects across Europe where this cooperation on the ground, across borders and across stakeholder groups really works and is fruitful. The Interreg program has financed the 3 Links project that focused on the Bavarian, Bohemian, Alpine population of Austrian population of lynx. There is still the Live Lynx project that is still running, where 5 countries are involved to help the Dinnerade lynx population not become extinct again. And so I think we really need to focus on these population-based conservation actions that include diverse stakeholder groups. We heard from Nikola Notaro that there is the Large Carnivore platform on the EU level, but there are also regional platforms on people and large carnivores. I think a good approach to include diverse views, diverse people. And as heard before, there are conflicts, no doubt about that, but there are also effective and appropriate conflict prevention and mitigation practices. Obviously, they need to be implemented comprehensively and timely in regions where large carnivores are. And we need to support the people who we want them to implement those conflict prevention measures. When we speak of conflicts around large carnivores, they are mostly related to depredation of livestock by wolves or bears. And so the shepherds, the livestock breeders, are the people on the ground who need better support. I think regardless of the presence of large carnivores, we need to better value and support the services that shepherds are providing for our nature and biodiversity, and that they have adequate opportunities to maintain their livelihoods. We definitely need to improve advice, training, and practical support, lasting practical support, lasting communication with the farmers. It's not enough to pay for fences, but we need to help them build the fences and maintain the fences. There are good initiatives where volunteers actually help farmers to build fences. I think there are great initiatives out there. We need to improve financing of prevention measures and make use of European Rural Development Program funding. So it's not just to the EU to improve the financing, but it's really to the member states and to the regional authorities to provide adequate financial support. There are programs out there. Same with state aid rules that allow farmers to be amended 100% reimbursement for the cost of preventative measures. This has to be implemented by the national authorities. Also, coexistence measures need to be included in the prioritized action frameworks and the CAP strategic planning. A few more words to the use of derogations and active management. We heard about this already today. We believe that the Habitats Directive offers sufficient flexibility to the member states. I rather have the feeling that some member states are very unsure how to interpret and implement this flexibility. So definitely the updated guidance document on species protection will be very useful to member states, and we're looking forward to its publication. Obviously, derogations always have to be conducted on a case-by-case basis when all other alternative solutions have failed. And I think it's up to the Commission to make sure that derogations are not misused. Also, the European Court of Justice made it very clear on the Finnish case that derogations from the strict protect regime are possible, but only under very strict conditions. And then when we talk about active management or hunting of large carnivores, I also have the feeling that conflicts are being instrumentalized. We hear a lot of shouting for hunting of large carnivores, and it is often sold as the silver bullet, I have the feeling. But when we talk about active management and hunting of large carnivores, there's really need to manage expectations. What can active management possibly do, and what will it not do? It will definitely not solve, the hunting of wolves will definitely not solve livestock conflicts unless you kill all wolves in the area. So whoever is asking for management hunting, I think they should really define very clearly the management and conservation goals for the species. Okay, so coming to an end, summing up, I definitely think the return of large carnivores is, on one side, a European success story. On the other side, it remains, no doubt, a big task to make this coexistence work. We have a workable legal framework for the protection and management of large carnivores, but we really need to look at a local scale, at the local conflicts, improve support for the people living with large carnivores, and again, we need to take greater efforts to ensure transboundary cooperation and come together as Europeans across national borders to make coexistence work and to exchange our views and our experiences. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much in particular for keeping on time to the 10 minutes. And very good to have that intervention from WWF that is very active in its life project. And also many of you will know WWF is also part of the EU platform on coexistence between people and large carnivores. So thank you for that. Next, we're going to move to Professor Enrique Okarma from the Institute of Nature Conservation from Krakow in Poland. And we're going to move from the European scale approach to an example of a very interesting member state from a legal and population perspective, that is Poland. So over to you, Professor Okarma.
Thank you very much. I hope that my microphone works well. Can you confirm, please?
Yes, everything's working well.
Okay, now I'm trying to put my presentation on the screen. Okay, so first of all, I would like to thank you very much that I got such an opportunity to be with you in such an event. On another hand, it's a sort of complicated now because Maurice said that it's always difficult to be after John. And I completely agree. And now I'm after John and you, which makes the whole things even more complicated, actually. On another hand, my job is relatively simple because now after just drawing this pan-European perspective, I would like to tell you a little bit more about the very problem, which is maybe very specified for the Polish situation. So then my main goal is just to try to answer the question which you have on the first slide. Actually, whether really the wolf in Poland is really in unfavorable and inadequate conservation status, which I already noticed, which was both on the presentation by John and by you. Okay, so a little bit about the legal status of the wolf in Poland. So actually, the wolf, of course, is covered by the Habitats Directive in Poland. We got the species in Annex 2. It means that the animal and species of community interest which should be especially of conservation should be created. And actually, Poland has fully fulfilled those obligations of the annex and has established already such an areas for the wolf conservation. You see here the map on the down left-hand side, 25 such an areas where the wolf is the goal of conservation were created in the continental biogeographical region, and 10 areas in the alpine biogeographical region. And also the wolf for Poland was fixed in Annex 5. So it means actually that theoretically or practically we can do some management of the species. So usually it means hunting under the condition that we are going to maintain the population still in the favorable conservation status. However, Poland decided to go on his own way. I mean that we are not using at all the Annex II to manage the species, because the wolf was removed from the game species list in 1998. And just by law in 2001, this species was declared as the strictly protected species in Poland. So let's say more or less for 20 years now, the wolf is strictly protected species. So it's not the European Union, it's not the Habitat Directive which tell us that this species should be protected. We decided it's on our own. And Poland was divided by the Habitat Directive into two biogeographical regions. So a tiny piece, which is just the Carpathian Mountains and the fragments close to the Carpathian Mountains, it is the Alpine region, which covered only, let's say on average, 3% of Poland. The rest of Poland, basically all Poland, 97% belongs to the continental region. And then let's have some words about the last species assessment of the wolf, which came under a report under Article 17 of the Habitats Directive. And of course, it is completely right that the European Commission just put the country reports together. It's not intervening into the, however, the Poland sent such a report. Have a look. It means that for the most of the Poland in the continental region, the wolf still got, as it was previously, unfavorable E1 conservation status. Only in the mountains, only in the few tiny population in the mountains, the conservation status of the wolf is favorable. You know, I am working with wolves in Poland for nearly 40 years, involved with biology and management. And I have to say that I am quite confused with this type of conservation status for the wolves in Poland, in most of the country actually. And I'm going to give you some facts why that's my idea that something is really wrong here is based. So let's come back to the first assessment. The first assessment covered the years 2001-2006. You see here the map of Poland with the red spots are places when the wolf existed, and 2006 is usually the eastern fragment of Poland and only few spots in the central or more in the western part of Poland. The range of the species in 2006 was established for about 25,000 square kilometers. Then in that report, so-called favorable reference range was set for around 100,000 square kilometers. Population, the number of wolves in 2006 was estimated between 300 to 400 animals. So then as the result, the reference population size was set to be more than 1,200 individuals. That's everything which you see here. Of course, it's only for the continental bioregion, because concerning the alpine bioregion, everything was fine because the range was nearly 9,000 square kilometers. The same was the reference range set, and the population was around 200 individuals and 200 as the reference population. So for the mountainous population, for the alpine population, there was not a problem actually. During the next 12 years, after 2006, the wolf population in Poland just basically exploded. So, you see here the development of the population is 2012, in 2018, now around 50%, 55% of the Poland territory is covered with wolves. This data came from the Atlas of Communist Mammals, which Institute of Nature Conservation carried on during last 15 years. So coming back now to that report of the species assessment for the wolf, the last one. So as you see in the continental bioregion, the current range of the wolf is nearly 150,000 square kilometers. It means, comparing to the reference range, that the current range is higher than 50% more than the reference range. The current population was set as the best value is close to 1,600. In my opinion, it's much, much higher. But anyway, have a look on the minimum and maximum, which can be even more than 2,000. The reference population was said to be more than 1,200. It means once again that the population size is once again much higher than the reference population size, which was set in 2006. And you know, and keeping in mind those data, then I completely do not understand that the wolf still obtained unfavorable conservation status in spite of the fact that the range increased at least 7 times comparing 2006, between 2 to 3 times comparing to 2012. Population increased between 4 to 5 times at least comparing to 2006. So if there are defects, and one interesting justification which came from the Polish government, what was justification for the U1 conservation status? They said like that: in the western part of the continental biogeographical region, the wolf population is still in expansion, and the most likely has not yet reached favorable range and favorable population. That is why range and population parameters were assessed as U1, unfavorable. Favorable conservation status will be possible to receive after stabilization of both wolf range and numbers. So, such a justification can raise a question if the favorable conservation status for any species, actually we are discussing the wolf here, cannot be given to its population which is still in expansion. Secondly, does it mean that we should wait with favorable conservation status designation until the species is everywhere? In the case of the wolf, wolves everywhere means an intense human-wolf conflict, decreasing or even lack of social acceptance of the species, and more illegal actions against wolves. If so, will we be satisfied that we have achieved such a favorable conservation status? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Professor Okarma. And I know it's also relevant for Bulgaria, which reported unfavorable for 2 out of its 3 populations, which has sparked a very interesting debate. I'm looking at the time we have left. We're not doing too bad. We're going to move to a Q&A session. But first, we're going to have a short intervention from Delphine Depuy from European Landowners Organization. ELO, who you know is an organization very active in promoting coexistence, but ELO is also a co-secretariat of the Intergroup on Biodiversity, Hunting, Countryside. So over to you, Delphine.
Thank you so much, David, and well done, Face, for this really interesting meeting. As you know, the European Landowner Organization has the privilege to be the co-chair of the European platform on coexistence on large carnivores, together with the European Commission for 6 years now. So we always very much welcome such discussion and exchange on that important topic. Thank you to all the MEPs for their strong messages, and also for Nikola Notaro for their support towards land managers. What is clear is that all stakeholders deserve to be heard and consulted in this debate, and that's pretty clear from what we heard today. We truly hope that the EU platform will continue to play its part in that sense. While we are, of course, advocating for important role of the EU, we would like to draw the importance of local and regional platforms, and this is already happening. We already organizing in this framework regional and local meetings, but we would very much welcome the reinforcement of this aspect, and especially cooperation between local platforms also, like a lot of intervention mentioned the transboundary management was important. So it's still a challenge to connect all those local and regional platforms all together to make sure that we have a coherent management towards large carnivore. So we have built up the conviction that while endangered species have the full rights to protection granted to them, care must be taken that the concern of those in rural areas living closest to these animals are heard, understood, and respected. And this means taking action and ensuring that the lives and livelihoods in rural areas are also protected. So, and I think I don't want to repeat that everyone said already, but it's important to underline that the public funding to the livestock sector should be consistent with the coexistence principle and the conservation of large carnivores. The preventing measures that were well mentioned by Nikola are really not often used by member states and not really enough known and rightly explained. So I think there is still a really important aspect to train local and regional management authority. They should be well informed on this existing funding and how to train better farmers and local managers. So all in all, and it has been said a lot, the socio-economic dimension on the consequences of the return on large carnivore, including the cultural aspect. I think it was already said by John, but it's really important. Still need to be further studied, and we need to find adequate solution for all, and I mean for all. So I hope the future guidelines for the European Commission will take this into consideration, of course, even if we know it won't be only on large carnivore, but I think it's really important. The ELO in that sense made also a lot of recommendation in this study that was recently published. So we will be very pleased to share this study to all the audience. I will put the details in the Q&A platform. And we thank you again for this really excellent meeting. And we are at disposal as landowner, as co-chair of the platform again, for those who would like to share any question and concern regarding this aspect. We are at disposal. And thank you again.
Thank you very much, Delphine. That was really useful and good to have that intervention from ELO. We are in the Q&A session now. I'm going to try to do something ambitious here. We have approximately 15 minutes. A number of questions have come in. I'm going to go through some of these questions and I'm going to direct them to certain panelists. But when it comes to answering these, after I pose the questions, feel free to be flexible and other panelists, including the Commission and including MEPs can jump in because I have to be conscious of timing, and we have closing remarks by MEP Juan, Ignacio, Zoido also in 15 minutes. Okay, let me start. There is a question by Robert Kenward, also linked to IUCN. I think this could be put to John Linnell, and the question is, could zoning be a way forward rather than blanket protection across Europe? And also for John, we have received a question from Valerie van den Abiel, raising an issue with fencing at the local level, and fencing having implications on other biodiversity goals, and fencing causing conflicts with other species, including mammals, for example. So just park that and think about that, John. We have a question which came before the event by Kaya Luckman from Europark Federation. And the question is the size, representativity and connectivity of the European Protected Areas Network, Natura 2000 and Amaro network, sufficient to protect large carnivores? Maybe Moritz, you could think about that question, and maybe Enrique, you could think about it from a Polish perspective. You referred to Wolf Annex 2 in Poland. Please just hold your thoughts on that. We have a couple of questions for Nikola Notaro. One related to what could a mechanism or a procedure to amend the annexes look like? That is from Andreas Schneck. We have questions, let's say, from both sides related to hunting. We have one, for example, coming from Jose Maria Gallardo, with the wolf populations growing in Spain. There was confusion about the presentation with respect to sustainable hunting. What is the role of sustainable hunting from the Commission's perspective? And what if you don't have sustainable hunting in place in terms of dealing with conflicts? And on the other hand, we had a question from Joe Schwab, and that is an interpretation of a court ruling that wolves cannot be killed unless it has been proved there is no viable alternative to lethal management. And what is the Commission doing in that respect? Therefore, for Mr. Notaro. And then I will move, there is also a question for Mr. Zoido, and the question is, in his presentation, he referred to wolf damages to livestock, but also a risk to rural communities. And could you please clarify this and add more explanation about this conflict in Spain? So this is quite an ambitious approach, but maybe over to you, John, for that first question on zoning and also implications for impacts of fencing on other wildlife and also other implications to some protected species. And then we'll move from there.
Okay. No, so the zoning question depends totally on what you mean by the word zoning. Like, sort of, in the extreme case, is often used as being areas where you have wolves and no wolves, or bears and no bears. And that type of approach is probably going to be very difficult to justify or implement legally, socially, and practically in any EU context. But if you interpret the zoning is just doing slightly different things in slightly different ways in different places, then I think that is a matter of course. Like, you have protected areas, you have Natura 2000 sites, which have an inside and an outside. So on that kind of scale, where you just slightly modify the way that you do things, you modify the way that you invest in different measures, you maybe even modify the threshold you have for derogation. That is, I think, perfectly possible. But it's only a problem when you begin viewing this as being a black and white situation with carnivores and no carnivores. And that is something that you really will not be able to pull off fully inside the EU. The issue of fencing, I guess it depends totally much on the scale of fencing. There's sort of, you see some projects that try to basically fence wolves out of the whole landscape by having these huge electrified enclosures, and those simply don't work, and they probably do have side effects. But if a fencing is of smaller pastures, and especially if fencing is mobile, then the impact is going to be much less. So again, it depends totally on the scale of fencing and whether it's permanent fencing or mobile fencing. So it's very difficult to give a general answer on that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John, for dealing with those. And thank you also for being brief. This is quite an ambitious Q&A session. Over to Moritz for those questions linked to the Natura 2000 network. And maybe then to Professor Okarma, if he wants to comment from a Polish perspective on the sufficiency of protected areas for wolf in Poland.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I will be brief also. So I think when we look at protected areas and if they sufficiently help to sustain large carnivore recovery, it depends a bit on the species we look at, obviously. We know that wolves are very mobile and very flexible, and it's really the challenge to manage the conflicts also outside the protected areas. Whereas other species, lynx and also bear, that are vulnerable to habitat fragmentation, there might be the need to definitely secure migration corridors better through protected areas. For example, when we look at the Carpathians.
Excellent, thank you. and Professor Okarma, if you would like to comment from a Polish perspective.
Okay, I think that let's say for Poland, it is it's not a problem that we will have enough or not enough protected areas actually, because the wolf, as I told you, is a species which is strictly protected by the Polish law over the whole territory of Poland. So those 35 Natura 2000 sites which were created, it was just to fulfilling the annex to regulations of habitat directives, and that's all. Of course, the question is, I think that the more important question for us is a sort of the Polish-German perspective, because we are sharing that so-called lowland or Central European wolf population, which John still mentioned that this population got a sort of the mark of vulnerable, or it was endangered not many years ago, and so and so. Of course, this is quite a lot of dispute also between scientists, if at all that population should be called a genuine population, because this is quite a link between all of the animals, all of lowland of Poland and Germany. So coming back to your question, you asked about that, and it is not a problem for Poland that we have not enough Natura 2000 sites for the wolves, because as I told you, Poland is a very specific situation, because we are in the very center of the very good wolf range with a high wolf number, and when we got the species fully protected.
Thank you very much. And maybe to move to Nikola Notaro. I mean, if I could really summarize, because we have received questions beforehand with respect to hunting, also questions from a national perspective in Poland, referring to the high wolf population. We had a couple of questions from Romania as well about their national approach to large carnivore management, creating challenges. But maybe to simplify this question, I mean, in the context of the Commission's revised guidance on strict protection coming down the line, maybe you can say something about hunting as a tool for the management of large carnivores in the context of that guidance. And the other question was related to if there was a decision in the future on the annexes, what could that look like? What type of mechanism or procedure could be in place from Andreas from Germany? So over to you, Nikola. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, David. Thanks for the questions. Starting from the last one, well, the procedure to amend the annexes is actually established by the European Treaty, and it's in legal jargon is called the ordinary legislative procedure. So it's the so-called co-decision. It involves the Parliament and Council of Ministers with all member states who have to decide on the basis of a Commission proposal. So it's a rather complex process that normally does take from beginning to end several years. So it's not a fast solution in that respect. On the role of sustainable hunting, well, of course, we're talking about species in Annex 5 that can be managed through hunting, because otherwise this is not possible for species that are in Annex 4 and are strictly protected. Their hunting is only usable under a specific derogation. I would just say that the guidance can only express and explain what the legislation allows and cannot make the law. So it can certainly establish, well, explain rather, how hunting can be part of the management of populations of species that are in Annex 5, under the caveat that it does not have a negative effect on the maintenance of the favorable conservation status. So I think that principle will be reaffirmed in the guidelines. There was also a question that you mentioned before about the lack of alternatives to be demonstrated before wolves can be killed. Yes, that's clearly expressed in the legislation and in the case law of the Court of Justice. It is necessary before giving a derogation to demonstrate that there is no alternative, and that generally works. through demonstrating that prevention measures are not possible or have failed.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm looking at time, and we still have 5 minutes for Q&A, and in particular, I'm looking towards Elsi Katainen and Mr. Herbert Dorfman. If you'd like to comment on the content that's just been discussed, please feel free to take the floor. If not, we could move to 1 or 2 more questions before we come to conclusions by Mr. Zoido. Herbert Dorfman, would you like to take the floor for a comment?
Yeah, just very shortly. I think 2 reflections from my side for the very important question the Polish professor made on the Polish situation. And this, I think we need to reflect, what is the aim? Is the aim to have large carnivores everywhere, or is the aim to have the population in a stable situation? Because this is a completely different concept. And on this, I think the situation is not clear at all. And I share the opinion that the aim cannot be to have wolves everywhere. The second one, from the Commission side, but first of all, I'm not so convinced that in Piedmont there are no conflicts. What is for sure, in Piedmont or in the Alps of Piedmont, farmers more or less went away. There are no farmers anymore. And if there are no farmers, it's clear that there's less conflict. And I very often ask myself with whom the Commission is speaking if they assess if there's conflict or not. Very often they are not speaking with the people who are really on the ground. They are speaking, for example, with regional governments, which see the things very often in a very different situation. So it is useful to speak with the people on the ground. And it is clear that the conflicts are, and I think it's useless to say that the conflicts are not there. The conflicts are, and the conflicts are quite important, especially where the wolf came in the last year. So when it's quite a new situation on the ground.
Thank you for these remarks. Elsi Katainen, do you wish to make a comment before we move to closing remarks?
Yes, thank you, all the experts. It's been very fruitful to hear your presentations, even though I'm not always in the same line, because I think it's very, very important to take account to local solutions. And I think that every areas are not heard enough. But one detail that I'm very glad, if the costs causing for about fencing or anything that costs some payments to farmers, if farmers get that back, it's very good news. But the money should come from anywhere else but from CAP, because it's away from farmers if it's from CAP, Common Agri. So I'm not sure if I didn't understand right, and I'm asking you if you know better. Is it coming from some environmental or from CAP? Thank you.
Thank you very much, and indeed, thank you for raising that final point. And I think, yeah, it has been pointed out, the flexibility within Pillar 2 rural development to have measures for coexistence, and that is being discussed within the EU Large Carnivore platform. And of course, we're aware of this, these issues around where that money comes from, because there are implications of financing for farmers. Okay, we are nicely placed to have the closing remarks. And just to remind participants, we have sincere apologies for Mr. Álvaro Amaro, who's president of the Intergroup and the main host of this event. He had to attend an urgent appointment, but he has asked for Mr. Juan Ignacio Zoido to conclude this event. And with that, I would really like to thank all of the panelists and all of the great questions. But let's move to closing remarks, and the floor is yours, Mr. Zoido.
Muchas gracias, David. Has llevado de una manera ejemplar el debate que hemos tenido en el día de hoy. Antes de pasar a hacer alguna breve reflexión sobre todo lo que se ha hablado, voy a contestar a la pregunta que se me hacía, porque sin duda me decían que si podía concretar un poco más qué es lo que sucedía. Y en España está siendo ya evidente que en aquellos lugares donde hay una población de lobos que se ha incrementado de una manera constante, desencadena sin duda alguna importantes conflictos dentro de lo que es una comunidad rural, es decir, entre los agricultores, los ganaderos y la propia gente que reside en las inmediaciones, que se ve amenazada por la presencia de esos grandes carnívoros. Y he dado unos datos que son reveladores, porque los daños que se han producido solo en una comunidad autónoma, una región como Castilla y León, han pasado de 400 en el 2007 hasta 1.600 en el 2017. Es decir, en 10 años se ha multiplicado de una manera muy exponencial. Por tanto, la magnitud del problema es grande. ¿Y por qué decía yo que produce resultados totalmente perjudiciales? Pues muy claro, porque el tema no es tan solo en las pérdidas que tienen los ganaderos. Yo creo que los ganaderos se llegan a plantear abandonar sus tierras, y eso sin duda viene a contribuir lo que se llama la Europa vacía, en este caso la España vacía, es decir, esa España donde hay menos oportunidades, donde no se hace una gestión de todos los recursos naturales en el más amplio sentido de la palabra, de la manera en que tradicionalmente se había venido haciendo. Y yo creo que las compensaciones económicas, creo que sinceramente no son suficientes, porque se trata del trabajo que han llevado a cabo los ganaderos durante muchísimos años y del patrimonio genético que incluso llegan a perder. Por tanto, yo creo que cuando terminaba yo mi intervención, yo decía que había que contribuir desde la Comisión a resolver los conflictos, porque yo lo denomino un conflicto. Y ahora digo por qué vuelvo a incidir en este tema. Porque los conflictos que se producen entre todos los intereses en juego llevan como consecuencia la despoblación, el éxodo rural y la creciente desprotección de todo el lugar. ¿Qué es lo que ocurre? Pues bueno, que al final, como no se resuelven esos conflictos, pues se generan más problemas de los que se trataban de evitar. Y ha puesto mi colega Herbert Dorfman un ejemplo evidente. Ha dicho que se ha despoblado la zona del Piamonte porque precisamente no se han resuelto los conflictos. Muchas veces la Comisión deja que se vayan resolviendo los problemas por sí solos y esa no es una solución que sea adecuada. Por tanto, eso espero haberle dado respuesta a quien me lo solicitaba, y desde luego llegar a conclusiones es muy difícil después de lo amplio que ha sido el debate, las aportaciones tan importantes que ha habido y sin duda yo creo que ha habido unas aportaciones por parte del señor Notaro que han sido sin duda alguna dignas de agradecer, porque se comprometió a responder un número importante de preguntas y de cuestiones. Así lo ha hecho. Es verdad que se puede compartir todas o no, pero no cabe la menor duda que hay que agradecerle el compromiso que ha tenido y el cumplimiento que ha dado de él. Yo reconozco que hay algunas cuestiones que no comparto el criterio suyo, pero dentro de que no se compartan los criterios, creo que es el diálogo el que tiene que producir precisamente las consecuencias de la solución a los distintos problemas. Y desde luego sí quiero, acerca de las afirmaciones que ha podido hacer, que insisto han sido muchas, bueno, pues yo le quería comentar que sin duda somos conscientes de que el cambio de anexos en la directiva no significa, como en España se habla de manga ancha, y que pasar de un anexo a otro también significa respetar las medidas de conservación. Pero las cifras en España indican que la legislación debe adaptarse mejor a la realidad, y por los comentarios que he oído en otros países, creo que ese tema debe de ser algo a reflexionar para tratar y procurar darle una solución, no simplemente que se vayan incorporando nuevas especies a los anexos a medida que se van incorporando un Estado miembro a la Unión Europea. Han sido muchas las reflexiones que se han hecho sobre las plataformas europeas, nacionales, regionales y locales. Habrá que integrarlas y habrá que saber aprovechar todos los fondos de los que puedan disponer agricultores, ganaderos y desde el punto de vista del desarrollo rural para conseguir todo ese tipo de medidas preventivas que permitan que se haga mucho más sostenible la convivencia de los grandes carnívoros con la agricultura, la ganadería y el mantenimiento del terreno. Pero también me gustaría hacer alguna reflexión acerca de la caza, porque creo sinceramente que a veces, desde el punto de vista ideológico, se criminaliza la gestión de la caza. Y creo que sinceramente, sobre los grandes carnívoros, cualquier solución que se le dé tiene que ser integral y debe contemplar a todos los actores que están implicados. Los cazadores deben ser un elemento esencial en la gestión de las poblaciones, porque son y han sido siempre tradicionalmente un agente y un elemento esencial. Y creo que lo deben de seguir siendo en el futuro. Cualquier esfuerzo que vaya encaminada a la conservación de los grandes carnívoros, yo creo que debe de incorporar a todos los actores, incluidos los cazadores. Y aquí no es cuestión de que se criminalice a uno u otro sector, sino que todos los sectores, también los cazadores, deben de ser parte de la solución y no parte de un problema. Y también me gustaría pues hacer una, para quizás terminar, porque quiero sin duda felicitar a todos, pero muy especialmente las reflexiones que ha hecho John. Es la primera vez que lo he leído con frecuencia, pero es la primera vez que lo escucho. Y es verdad que ha puesto encima de la mesa una serie de cuestiones, de reflexiones, no fáciles de abordar, pero sí que hay que abordarlas. Esas cuestiones no podemos mirar para otro lado si tenemos que acometerlo. Por tanto, yo creo que esas opiniones que parece que están en contradicción, como es la mayor flexibilidad que unos piden para los estados y un ejercicio de la normativa a la nueva realidad del terreno, otros que dicen lo contrario, que la flexibilidad ya existe, pero que le corresponden a aplicarlo y que los estados miembros no lo aprovechan, yo creo que lo que hay que hacer es poner sentido común, sensatez y de verdad tener vocación en resolver los problemas partiendo del reconocimiento de los conflictos que hay, porque si no reconocemos que hay conflictos, no los podemos resolver. Y en cualquier caso, yo creo que la mejor manera para que pudiéramos lograr un cierto consenso en todas estas cuestiones que se han ido suscitando y una mejor conservación, yo creo que sería bueno que de verdad apoyemos a todos aquellos que sufren a veces el incremento de las poblaciones, como son los ganaderos, y que a veces no se les escucha. Simplemente queremos arreglarlo pagándole una pequeña indemnización. Y yo creo que no se necesita, como antes comentaba, un simple apoyo económico, sino también un asesoramiento, como muy bien se ha venido destacando en varias de las intervenciones, ese asesoramiento para que se puedan tomar medidas preventivas y también al mismo tiempo darle seguridad y tranquilidad a todas las poblaciones rurales, porque va a haber una gestión razonable y sostenible de todo lo que es la convivencia de los sectores que están en el entorno de los grandes carnívoros. Y por último, yo quiero que sigamos en esta línea, felicitar por la organización y la gestión que habéis hecho para la celebración, aprovechar una vez más para felicitar a todos los que han aportado las cuestiones desde el punto de vista técnico, a todos aquellos que también desde el punto de vista de distintos sectores han manifestado cuáles son sus problemas y qué camino creen que se puede utilizar. Y termino diciendo que yo no hablaba de que a veces, he tomado nota aquí y creo que literalmente decía que la política a veces complica más el problema. Y por tanto yo le digo a John que la política cuando no se utiliza con mayúsculas, la política con mayúsculas es la habilidad y el arte de darle solución a los problemas. Y creo que hoy aquí nos hemos reunido un grupo de diputados de diferentes grupos, pero que tenemos como vocación servir para resolver, en este caso, la gestión que hay que hacer desde el punto de vista sostenible de los grandes carnívoros en la Unión Europea. Y para ello tendremos que poner y tomar medidas y actualizar las que ya tenemos. Así que gracias a todos y disculpar a Amaro porque no ha podido estar presente con nosotros. Sabéis que nuestro presidente está muy implicado y por tanto quiero disculparlo y quiero a ti, David, especialmente agradecerte toda la gestión, no solo en la organización, sino cómo has dirigido también hoy el debate, cosa tan compleja como ello.
Thank you very much. And, you know, really appreciate the European Commission and members of the European Parliament. I think now you can hear me. Now you can hear me, I think. Yes, a final thank you very much to members of the European Parliament, to the European Commission, to our experts and stakeholders. We had, I think it was an excellent event and active participation from the audience. I think we had 350 participants at our high point. And, you know, we had a very wide-ranging debate, which is exactly what we need. And I'd also like to thank the very good interpretation from English to Spanish. With that, we conclude, and we wish you all a very good evening, and thank you again for your participation. Much appreciated.